the UN Truth Supervision Organization.
Hello, Montana. Hello, world. Chris Islip here from the Montana World Affairs Council. This is Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana and Montana to the world. To say that the last 8 months has been extraordinary might be the understatement of this young century. The pandemic has, of course, affected every facet of our lives and our societies. Healthcare, education, governance, transportation, you name it, we've been impacted by it. The virus has deeply shocked our economies. Local, state, domestic, regional, and global economies are all feeling the impact, and those effects are deep and long-lasting. And although we're still seeing global infection numbers on the rise, we are beginning to look forward and to see what changes a post-pandemic economy might have for us and the world. To help us understand that, I've invited 3 people. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Montana and US domestic economies. Tomorrow at noon, instead of at 7 p.m., we're going to be talking to somebody from Dublin, Ireland, about the European perspective. Then finally on Thursday, we'll wrap up with a global perspective. So you'll want to look at all 3 series to get this incredible scope on a post-pandemic economy. Now, we bring this thanks to the generous sponsorship of First Interstate Bank. And we also would like to thank our sponsors, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, and Stockman Bank. Now let me introduce tonight's guest. Bill Fitzgerald is Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager at First Interstate Bank in Montana. He serves as Chairman of the Investment Policy Committee and is a member of the First Interstate Bank Economic Committee. Prior to joining First Interstate Wealth Management, he was the Senior Portfolio Manager and Regional Vice President for Merrill Lynch Investment Managers. Bill received a BA in Management from Lynchburg College and an MBA with a concentration in Finance from the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University. He was a member of the CFA Institute, CFA Society of Washington, D.C., the Baltimore Security Analysts, and the Washington Association of Money Managers. Bill, you're very welcome. How are you doing? You're going to have to unmute yourself there, Bill.
Chris, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for joining us, Bill. I really appreciate it. Now, I wonder if you could kick off giving our audience here a little idea, maybe briefly, of the economic impact here in Montana and the U.S. But more importantly, this show is about looking forward in the post-pandemic economy. What are we looking at? What are we talking about? What can we expect? Over to you.
Sounds good, Chris. I'm going to share my screen with you. I've got a presentation to provide the group.
Okay, you go right ahead.
Okay, so if it's okay, I'll start off with just a quick snapshot of the U.S. economy. So on the top left-hand side, just a quarter-over-quarter annualized GDP, gross domestic product. You can see, of course, in the first quarter, we declined about 5%. In the second quarter, we went into free fall. The U.S. economy fell about 31.4%. The third quarter, we are expected to see a significant rebound in economic activity, probably close to 30%, followed by the next 3 quarters of consecutive growth. On the top right-hand side, just to sort of highlight how the impacts have occurred across the country. So you'll see the United States, for example, we expect to be down about 4% in 2020. Globally, we expect to see 2020, the global economy down about 3.9%. Bottom left-hand side, this is kind of an interesting piece. It talks about economic surprises, and surprisingly, we actually have seen good economic data over the last 6 months. So that's been certainly encouraging, not just for us, but for most investors. If we turn to the next page, 3 of 29, you can see on the top right-hand side really is where we saw the fallout from the pandemic. We can see that the consumer spending fell 24% in the third quarter, followed by general investment down of 8.77%. So, that was a very, very dramatic decline in the second quarter. And you can see the first quarter, we were easing into it as we got into the end of February. Consumer spending dropped about 4.75%. So if you look right in the middle of the page, you'll see example, real GDP quarter over quarter. Again, third quarter, we dropped 31.4%. So a very, very significant drop to the US economy. Okay, so moving on to Montana, you can see on page 4. So what this graph shows us is the percent of total GDP derived from selected industries. And you can see something, and so the yellow or the gold is Montana and the rest is US. So starting on the very right-hand side, you can see that government provides a lot of contribution to GDP in the state of Montana. The second one was real estate. You can see there, pretty close to the US contribution. And then you can see we have other areas like healthcare, which of course, like in Billings is a good example. Billings, Montana, we have about 10% of the population somehow involved with healthcare. So certainly a big contributor to our GDP. Then other areas you can see manufacturing adding almost 8% to the economy in Montana, construction about 6%. So we've seen some pretty big declines in each of those areas, but those are sort of the major contributors to our own GDP. Turn to the next page on page 5, real GDP quarter over quarter annualized. On the right-hand side, we compare Montana to the United States. So you can see, for example, actually in the first quarter, US, we dropped about 4.8%, Montana dropped about 4.3%. So we fared a little better in the first quarter. Second quarter, you can see we dropped about 31.4%, US dropped about 30.8%. So not quite as good in the second quarter. On page 6, you can see this is what happened during the second quarter. So what we call contributions to real GDP quarter over quarter annualized. Starting on the right-hand side, you can see down 5.7%, healthcare and social assistance down 5.7%, combination in food service, travel, restaurants down about 5.1% in the quarter, transportation and warehousing down 3.2%. So other than the very left-hand side where you can see agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, and finance and insurance, those are only 2 positive contributors for us in the second quarter in Montana. On page 7, so I take a look here at US consumer spending, which as many of you know is 2/3 of our economy. Change in consumer spending, you can see year to date through September 27th, actually in Montana, we've increased 14.8%. The US has gone down 2.3%. So we have fared much, much better in terms of our consumer relative to the rest of the United States. On page 8, where the drivers were, where we saw increases or declines, you can see on the right-hand side, grocery up 17.4% in Montana. Again, total spending. The biggest detractor again was restaurants and hotels down 37.4% year to date through the end of September. Turn to page 9. So this is percent change in small business revenue. And again, looks like Montana, we fared a lot better than the rest of the United States. So through September 29th, small business revenue down about 13.4%, US down 23.2%. So much, much better picture. One consistent number on page 10 is the number of small businesses open. And many of you know, I'm sure have your own examples of small businesses, and you can see overall we're down about 25% both in the US and in Montana for new businesses opening. So that's quite discouraging, particularly for our state. Moving on to labor markets on page 11. So just taking a quick look at the US unemployment rate. So you can see the spike there we had closing in on 15%. We're now down about 7.9%. On the right-hand side, I break out each of the states within our region. So you can see Montana, for example, our unemployment rate is 5.6. So we have the lowest we're the 9th lowest in the United States. So certainly good news from our perspective. Bottom left-hand side, we've seen a significant decline in non-farm payrolls. The big one, of course, being in April. Now, many of you know we've had the CARES Act that passed that provided a lot of liquidity to individuals and businesses, and we've seen a pretty significant rebound in hiring. Although the last report for August was a little bit not quite as robust as the previous few quarters. Wage growth, bottom right-hand side, you'll see that big spike in average hourly earnings. So right around April is when the CARES Act, the additional funding for unemployed came in, and so that's why we see that sort of spike there in the wage growth. On page 12, so I break out Montana. So this is Montana long-term unemployment trends. So the good news here, as you can see on page 12, the United States long-term 7.9, Montana 5.6. Well, when I bring that in on the bottom, you can see the regional short-term, US again 7.9, 5.6. So not much of a change there. But the good news is we continue to be less than the overall US, which again ranks us number 9 in terms of the unemployment rate. On page 13, so this one is we call it current unemployment claims per 100 people. So the United States, for example, we have a little bit higher in terms of initial claims. We have 0.61 people per 100 for Montana versus the United States of 0.49. So a little bit higher in continuing claims. The additional Fed, part of the CARES Act, the initial Fed unemployment benefits, as many of you know, have expired, and they're trying to renegotiate some of that right now. On page 14, we have percent change in employment. So again, you can see here from through August 21st, Montana down about 4.8%. Again, coming in better than the United States at an average about 6.9%. And then on page 15, something we watch very closely, there's a larger one we follow in the United States, something called JOLTS, but what we have here is these are job postings. So all in all, I mean, through the week ending October 2nd, you can see job postings have only declined 2.5% in Montana. So it seems like our market's held up pretty well versus the US down to 8.2%. So, you know, there's certainly some encouraging news in terms of jobs still available for our citizens here. Okay, then one of the real positives, I'm turning on page 16. This has been a very, very, you know, I'm not sure if it's all part of COVID, just a general theme, but in terms of housing, you can see, so we have the average home price increasing year over year, 6.74%. If you look at Montana, you can see there it's 7.65%. So in the top quartile in terms of home price appreciation. And in Montana, for example, the head of First Interstate Bank, the mortgage, the number of new applications, the majority of new home applications coming from First Interstate Bank have been people outside of Montana. So we're certainly seeing that trend of hearing people from Portland, San Francisco, Dallas, other areas, other urban areas moving into areas of the world like Wyoming, Montana. And it's kind of interesting, you know, if you look to the very left, Idaho, which is one of our 6 states that First Interstate is represented in, Idaho had the best home price appreciation of almost 12% on a year-over-year basis, which is pretty remarkable. On page 17, so this is again is taking a look at the overall sort of graph for what we call Freddie Mac Home Price Index. Overall, you can see Montana 7.4, US 6.55. And then I broke it out a little further for a 5-year time period. And this number surprised me. You can see the 5-year number, Montana, we increased on average about 28.97 versus the US of 28.43. So certainly very, very strong housing market in Montana. One of the things driving that, of course, is low interest rates. The second part is very, very low existing home inventory levels in many parts of our state. On page 18, so I take a look at the regional areas. So on the left-hand side, again, Montana, that's our headquarters for First Interstate Bank, but we're also in Wyoming, South Dakota, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. But you'll see Montana there. We have 3 areas: Billings, Great Falls, Missoula. So on a 1-month change, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, but you can see the 1 month in Billings, which is interesting too. We're up about 8.05% for the 1-year price change in home appreciation. Great Falls about 5.92, and Missoula 8.59. But if you look at the 5-year average, you can see Missoula up an astonishing 37% over the last 5 years. and billings lagging a little bit behind Great Falls by about 20.96%. But again, very, very good news. Overall, the United States, for that same time period, the very top hand right, you'll see the average 5-year return in the United States is about 32.65. So Missoula clearly is well above that pace. Okay, so that takes a quick look at that. And then what I want to show you on page 19, so this is what we call our strategy summary report. This is our outlook specifically for the next 2 to 3 quarters. Top left-hand side, you can see this is dated. We have our strategy meeting the first Tuesday of the month. We just changed our GDP from recession to recovering. As I said, we're going to expect to see third quarter economic growth rebound, probably close to 30-35% on a quarter-over-quarter basis. The consumer and business, which have been big drivers for Montana and nationally. Back in April, we had been negative on each of those indicators. We've gone to neutral on that. Our main concern right now is that, many of you know, consumer net worth is at an all-time high, which tends to be a very good driver for economic growth. However, we also have, areas where we're looking at, for example, liabilities, where consumers are at all-time highs in terms of consumer debt, which is a long-term concern for us. Housing, manufacturing, both improving. So not just in Montana, but nationally, we're seeing good evidence of that. One area, particularly for Montana, that we like to see better improvement is rig count. So Hughes, which is an energy company, does a survey of rigs, and we're down about 65% on a year-over-year basis. And that's a very big part of our manufacturing, specifically in Montana. So to go, see the rig count drop as dramatically as it has. Oil prices now, we've seen a rebound back over 40, so that should be positive going into the end of the year and next year. But it has been a lag on manufacturing, particularly for Montana. Inflation, neutral. Monetary policy, I mean, again, everyone on this call realizes what's happened with interest rates. We're basically at all-time lows in interest rates, so it's provided very, very good, cheap money for individuals, corporations, companies. So between consumer net worth, low interest rates, we have gasoline prices, extremely low prices, natural gas. So a lot of our sort of day-to-day needs are very, very low at this time, and we expect that to continue into 2021. Bottom left-hand side, just to kind of get a sense to the group about how we're looking at allocations. So cash, money markets, we have a very slight overweight. Fixed income or bonds, we're neutral. Equities, we were underweight in the fourth quarter of 2019. And of course, with February, March, we did increase our positions back to neutral. Top right-hand side, just a quick snapshot in terms of how we look at the equity sector. So valuations, we have our view as overvalued. However, we have not reduced stocks only because we cannot find a more reasonable alternative right now. So that's just my group's 6 to 9 month outlook. And then I thought, Chris, I'll just wrap up quickly with just a kind of a view on page 20. Just to give everyone a quick update on where we are, particularly in Montana, where we are with COVID. So on page 20, this is one of our research providers that we use at First Interstate Bank, a company called Evercore ISI. So right on the top left-hand side, you'll see cases. We had a huge spike, and this is dated October 8th. We had one of the biggest spikes across the country, about 55,000 new cases. Overall, we have on the right-hand side, you can see in terms of death, also a big day last Thursday. We're right around 203,900 total U.S. deaths from COVID-related incidents. On page 21, really to kind of get into Montana now. So we break out all 50 states, but on the left-hand side, you kind of come down. So this is stats by state. So you can see Montana, for example. Right now, we have cumulative cases, about 16,677 cases of COVID right now. We did have a very, very big spike last week, actually one of the biggest in the United States. You can see about 425 cases. And then our 7-day jumped to about 10%, and our 7-day percent also increased by 11%. So a little bit higher than the national average. At the very top, you can see about 5%. So, clearly that's why Montana's been in the news here a bit. On page 22, so we're getting a lot of questions about this in terms of hospitalization versus capacity by state. So again, if you look on the left-hand side, So cumulative right now, we've got about 851 cases actual, currently hospitalized in the state of Montana, 263, and we have licensed beds of 3,246. So in terms of percentages, you can see to the right there about 66%. So we have 20% capacity with our ICU, and that's the United States is about 9%. So we're about double the United States in terms of our available in terms of capacity. On page 23, you'll see page 23. So this is state changes and new cases over the last 7 days. You can see Montana, we're sort of in a top quartile. We're about the 13th state in terms of number of cases, unfortunately right behind New Jersey. Page 24 just breaks out more of a regional look for us. So you can see on page 24, really on the left-hand side, we had a pretty significant increase. Sort of looking into the early part of this in the second quarter, sort of phased out. We've kind of flattened out overall for the entire West right now. And Chris, I'll stop there and see where we want to go from here.
Thanks so much, Bill. I really appreciate that. I mean, it was a great overview of what's going on in Montana and also vis-a-vis the U.S. We've got a little bit of time left, Bill. I've got a couple questions chatted in, and I have one myself. Let me start with this one, which is, the scope and scale of what is happening right now around the world and in America is been compared to great economic shocks, the Great Depression, World War II, the introduction of technology into the homes and workplace, the introduction of China into the WTO, all of these kind of resulting in structural changes to the American economy. Looking, at what you've described and then kind of looking ahead, do you see any significant structural changes to the Montana and or the U.S. economy?
Chris, give me a help here for one second. Just show me how I stopped sharing. I apologize.
Why don't
I'm not usually the presenter.
That's okay. Why don't you go ahead with that with the question, and then I'll figure this out.
Okay. So number one, I think structurally, as many of you know, the Federal Reserve was very, very aggressive in March, reducing rates essentially to zero. That was really trying to help stabilize the United States economy. The Fed has made it very clear that they do not intend to raise rates until 2023. So we really think that we're going to be in a low rate environment for a long period of time. So that really helps Montana businesses in terms of having the ability to lend at very low rates, the consumer to continue to borrow at very low rates. So that's going to be a big plus. We think structurally, oil energy use is going to drop probably pretty dramatically over the next few years. So that could put some pressure on us. And for us, we think that if we look long term, the consumer is still strong. If we continue to have those low unemployment rates, particularly in Montana, we think that's very beneficial for our state. That coupled with there is a chance that there may be a second or a CARES Act 2 additional stimulus plan put through. It sounds like right now that might not be passed until after the election. So that's all those individuals who are receiving those additional initial claims, probably won't be receiving anything for a while here. So that's definitely going to hurt the consumer here in the short term. But we think we are seeing overall business activity improving. I think once businesses have a better understanding in terms of where earnings are going to be, our biggest fear is you're going to start to see layoffs. You're already seeing areas like Walt Disney laying off 26,000 people. Ralph Lauren, 15% of the worldwide workforce. So one of our concerns is that if CEOs and small businesses are not seeing any sort of meaningful increase in revenues or sales, usually the first area they go to is cutting jobs, which is, again, that's such the big driver of our economy, not just Montana, but globally as well.
Yeah. And then, since you mentioned these relief packages, I mean, certainly government plays a role in what we're talking about right now. And there is concern, of course, as always, that the government's role, may be well-intentioned, but can at times continue what they call, like zombie sectors or zombie businesses who maybe in the current economic environment ought to maybe be left to fail in order to emerge through a new economy, right? There's talk about this. And also this goes along with the labor market and employment that, maybe sometimes that kind of relief is not useful in the long term. Can I ask you, Bill, looking again at Montana's economy, do you see any aspects of the Montana economy, and I'm not asking you if you believe they should fail, but which need to be restructured? And I mean, just one thought here, just to kind of, prime the pump is clearly, for example, in healthcare, the idea of telehealth, which was not so widespread, has become very widespread, very popular, and very efficient, and a way to decrease costs at this time, which is likely to continue going ahead. Now, that's a kind of structural change within the healthcare sector. Do you see anything else like that that's maybe looming for us, a change in these important parts of the Montana economy?
So, for us, for example, I mean, structurally, we talk about this a lot. I mean, you had China, for example, announce that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2060. So the implications of that, so 2/3 of their power plants are run on coal. So, okay, so there's potential that coal could be an obsolete industry here at some point in the future. Solar, wind continue to gain more and more traction. So structurally, that's a very, very big change. The production of electrical vehicles, and gaining traction there, more pressure on gasoline and energy production. So that long term could be a structural issue for us too. I think real estate and construction probably going to continue to be very strong here. There is some speculation that if we see a Biden president and the Democrats take over the Senate, there could be a very, very large infrastructure bill placed, and that could be very beneficial, not just for the United States, but for the state of Montana as well. But I think for us, it will be very interesting to think about number one, real estate, how companies like First Interstate Bank, how are we going to think about where people work? I mean, that's structurally, that's going to be a very interesting thing over the next couple of years to see how that happens. I mean, many of us on the phone, I'm sure, are working at home, no plans anytime soon to go back to the office. So I think energy certainly has a big piece of it. When we look at more of the US in 10 years, we've got, Medicare, Social Security, interest on the debt, and defense spending, 4 components making up 75% of the entire U.S. budget. So sort of that trickle down effect is the ability for the government, federal government, to help states like Montana. That could be a real concern as we move forward. I mean, the ability for governments to really fund significant operations, they're going to be sort of tied with these 4 major expense components.
That's really fascinating, Bill. I mean, certainly not a view we get very often, so it's much appreciated. Taking us through your presentation on where things are at vis-a-vis the U.S. and focusing in on Montana, and then giving us a little bit of an idea of, what's coming ahead in the post-pandemic economy. Bill, I'm afraid we've never, ever had enough time to take care of all of the questions and issues that these shows bring up. So I'm going to have to wrap up, but I'd hand over to you for any last word.
Well, Chris, we certainly appreciate it. These are, like you said, very, very trying times. We had a stock market that collapsed essentially 36% from the end of February down to March. People were truly panicked, but the recovery we have seen not only in the stock markets, but again, a lot of this has been, as you noted earlier, I mean, the Federal Reserve and government, those 2 pieces, I mean, had they not stepped in as aggressively as they had, I mean, consumer spending would have fallen a lot more than the 30% or 40% in certain parts of the country we saw. So certainly that was a big part of it. We do expect that there is going to be a second stimulus plan. The magnitude of it, we're not quite sure, but we feel like we've got a lot of strong things, particularly in Montana and the U.S. So we feel pretty confident that 2021 is going to be a pretty good year in terms of economic growth, not just for Montana, but for the rest of the country as well.
Thanks a lot for that, Bill. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Let me thank our other participants for coming on and remind you that tomorrow we have Dr. Jonathan Westrup coming from the Irish Management Institute in Dublin. He's going to give us a European perspective on a post-pandemic economy, looking at other aspects of what's going on both within Ireland and more broadly in Europe and how that connects to the United States and Montana. And then on Thursday, we'll have Joanna Shelton talking about the impact on the global economy. So again, come and join us on these next shows so you get the full picture. Remember, tomorrow, Wednesday's show is at 12 noon Montana time. Thursday is at 7 p.m. Let me thank again our sponsors from First Interstate Bank and our distinguished speaker sponsors, Stockman Bank, Allegiance, and the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation. Thank you all again for joining us. Bill, I really appreciate you coming on. Hope to see you all tomorrow at noon. Till then, be well. Goodbye.
Take care, Chris. Thank you.